Okay, so today was notable as Theresa May's first Prime Minister's questions, Prime Minister. This is a tradition that we have every Wednesday. I'm not sure how long it's been on a Wednesday. Certainly under the Cameron years, it was always on a Wednesday. But basically, it's an opportunity for the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to address questions, to be scrutinised, to address questions from the opposition, also from her own party, but generally speaking the questions pitched from members of a prime minister's own party are usually not set up questions, but they're usually more like statements to back up the government, i.e., would the prime minister agree this policy has been very successful in my constituency? So that's something that has been very consistent. I think it's a good tradition. I think it's very important for democracy that the head of government has to be scrutinised and answer tough questions on a regular basis. I think that's very important for democracy, and it isn't found everywhere in other democracies around the world. So this Westminster system, I think, is you know biased, but I think it's something good that we have. So I want to speak a bit about her performance and some of the ins and outs that were going on today. I didn't actually watch it directly on TV. I've just watched it from YouTube. Um, it is notable actually that there's arguably more focus on Jeremy Corbyn today than there was on Theresa May. Um, she made her opening pitch, which is I had meetings with ministerial colleagues, and this is kind of the set speech. So Jeremy Corbyn was congratulated her to a role that's kind of customary. Every member done that. And this is not actually the first time they faced off because the Trident debate the other day was technically her first time addressing the Commons. Um, I have to say that it's hard not to feel a bit sorry for Jeremy Corbyn because he's quite a lonesome figure in there. With the exception of those loyalist MPs, if we can put it that way, it's quite unfortunate seeing a leader with virtually no support from his backbenchers. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn himself was a long-time rebel, so one could argue this now he knows how it feels. But nevertheless, it's hard to take much. It's hard to gloat about something like that. I'm not as left-wing as Jeremy Corbyn, but I do feel somewhat sorry for him because whilst I think many of his politics are dead wrong, I really find it hard to dislike him on a personal basis. I really, really do think he is a decent man. And I know that's said many times, and whether people think I'm sincere or not in saying that, I don't really care. I do believe it. I believe Jeremy Corbyn is a decent man on a personal basis. I think that it is interesting that whilst he was pitching questions about very important issues like the housing ladder, housing affordability, and the legacy of food banks from the Cameron government, all the Tories could do was sit there and smugly laugh. Now, Theresa May gave some witty responses, but unfortunately, the responses were a bit in the mould of David Cameron. That is to say, they were a bit smug and kind of just, she thanked him for welcoming her to her role, and she also pointed out that Labour has long been talking about women in politics, and she pointed out the fact that the Tories have had two women prime ministers. He actually addressed her as the second woman prime minister. Now, I agree with the Tories in that they have a better record actually, and it's partly because they have focused on meritocracy over tokenism, um, and all women shortlists and so on. But anyway, the point is she spent more time kind of throwing jabs than just answering the questions directly. This is after saying that she agrees that Prime Minister's questions should be a serious occasion. Um, she did come across as strong insofar as she looked confident overall, but unlike both Tony Blair and David Cameron, Theresa May has significant government experience. She has been Home Secretary for 6 years. So it's not exactly being thrown into the deep end. It is an elevation. Obviously, Prime Minister is Prime Minister, but in that sense, she's had some preparation. She's been at the dispatch box before as Home Secretary. Whereas Tony Blair and David Cameron had to start from scratch. They were literally, I've just been reading Tony Blair's autobiography. He had never even been the most junior minister in government. So that's noteworthy. And I hope she doesn't go along that traction throughout her time in office because it's going to be unfortunate. This is the woman who spoke of the nasty party. Now, these days, I happen to believe Labour is more of a nasty party with what's going on in their leadership debate, but she has to be careful that she doesn't end up kind of filling the mold of what she described her party as being defined as, potentially being defined as. You have to answer the questions, not just focus on jabbing your opponent. Now, some people might say Jeremy Corbyn's approach is a bit boring, but I do give Jeremy Corbyn credit for trying his best to bring civility and maturity into the dispatch box. He has tried his level best to do that, and you have to give the man credit for that. And whatever happens in this Labour leadership contest, and even if Labour under Corbyn would be seen to be a disaster, whatever your viewpoint is, on a personal basis, no one could deny that Jeremy Corbyn has tried to bring, at least in PMQs, what happens within the NEC of the Labour Party is another matter, but at least within PMQs, he's tried to bring maturity to the debate. So I think he needs credit for that. Also, the issues that he is bringing up out are very important. Um, the Tories love to talk about social mobility and employment rates and all the rest of it. A legacy of food banks is nothing to shout about. And that's something that has absolutely skyrocketed under the last Tory government. So, and Theresa May was a big part of that. So I think the Tories have to be very careful about being too smug, when they're laughing at Jeremy Corbyn and his weak position at the moment, at least on a parliamentary level, because they need to understand that he is trying to pitch these questions, and the public see this, and the public just see a prime minister throwing cheap shots, basically. So in that sense, she didn't come across very well. Um, just going to talk about a bit of the backbench questions and the other questions and so on from other members. There were a few humorous moments. Stuart Andrew, who's a Conservative, joked about coming out as a Conservative having grown up in a council estate. The Prime Minister wished a happy birthday to Sir Edward Lee, his 66th birthday today. Jimmy Reid, this was quite significant, thanked the Prime Minister for supporting the official Labour Party position on Trident. That's a reference to the fact that most Labour MPs support the renewal of Trident against their leader. Now that I'm not a Corbynista, and I understand why the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, are very uncertain about his leadership. But that doesn't mean they have to throw cheap shots at the leader in that way. And I thought that was a bit, um, some of the cheap shots that are coming through the dispatch box, it's just as bad as Corbyn members, harassing and attacking Labour MPs. Labour MPs are coming across a bit like they're kind of bullying Jeremy Corbyn almost. Um, I'm not using that word lightly. It's one thing not having trust in your leader, but some of these cheap shots come across just that way, cheap shots. Um, he also thanked the Prime Minister for her work on type 2 diabetes. I believe it was Jamie Reid. It may have been a member. Um, but anyway, the Prime Minister has diabetes, so that's something that she's obviously personally interested in. Daniel Kaczynski, who is a Conservative member, spoke about the atrocity in Nice and that we are coming out of the European Union. We're not coming out of Europe. And he wanted the Prime Minister to reassure France of that, which of course she will do. Nusrat Ghani, who's a Conservative member, brought about a very important question about so-called honour killings, and she raised the case of the young Pakistani woman who was recently murdered, the singer. And that's something that is absolutely abhorrent. Now, every successive British Prime Minister has said this is a serious issue and there's no honour in killings. But I think it is true that we need to change some of the language as well, because that only gives weight to those who are doing it. So we should stop calling honour killings. We should call them religiously or culturally motivated killings. That's what they are, culturally motivated killings. This is one of those areas I think political correctness needs to go out the window. We need to get hard. And I believe in possibly whole life tariffs for those who are doing this. It's a despicable and cowardly crime, and it's good that she brought that up. Um, I do trust Theresa May to take that seriously. I think she will. Um, Julie Cooper raised a question about education. Um, Catherine McKinnell, who is a Labour MP from Newcastle, mentioned the issue of Heathrow expansion, and she referred to dithering Dave. Um, well, that's a bit of a jab at the former Prime Minister, who's now a backbencher. And during the Trident debate, he could be seen on the backbenches. Um, Andrew Stevenson, a Tory MP, brought up about the issue of aerospace and how this was one of those sort of pitch questions. Does the Prime Minister agree that our aerospace industry is still buoyant and all the rest of it? That's kind of a pitch question. Now, Angus Robertson, the leader of the SNP, I want to focus a little bit on him. I abhor the SNP. I can't stand them and their agenda. But I will say Angus Robertson is a very capable MP. I think he's they've got the right man in Westminster, put it that way. He's very capable. He's a good speaker. I disagree with about 90% of what he says, but he's confident. He's a capable speaker. He welcomed the Prime Minister to her role, and he said, "Will she guarantee that remains remain for Scotland in the European Union?" Now, this is a bit absurd. He knows full well that she has pledged Brexit means Brexit to the United Kingdom. Scotland, and I'm going to make another video about this, but Scotland is part of the United Kingdom. So if he really expects the Prime Minister to go to mainland Europe, in fact, I should say she's had a busy day because she's been meeting Angela Merkel today in Berlin. Um, if he really expects him to go there and kind of pitch for Scotland's independence, which is essentially what Angus Robertson is saying, it's a lot of nonsense. She also made a good point, and this is something that I hadn't thought about before, but it is a very good point. When the Scottish referendum was held 2 years ago, 2014, the UK was still in the European Union. Now, had Scotland got independence at that time, Scotland would have left the United Kingdom, or at least England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, would have still been in the European Union. What the SNP need to address is this fact that they simply cannot enter the EU like that. There's a waiting process. So what Nicola Sturgeon will be doing, and I'll save this for the other video more, but it's a fact, she'll be leaving Scotland in the wilderness because they're not simply going to be there in. And I would say this, if the other European governments do decide to let Scotland in on its own, or if they put it this way, if they pander to Scottish independence, it will damage relations with London, which they don't want. There may be anger about Britain's decision, but they're not stupid. They don't want bad relations with the United Kingdom, especially when there's multi-million, if not multi-billion pound trade deals already with us. So, um, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to round this up quite soon. I'll just say one last thing though about Brexit because it is really the issue of the day. Um, a Spanish friend of mine, acquaintance, more an acquaintance than a close friend, but he had a post basically ranting about Brexit and how you brought it on yourselves, Brits, and all this sort of stuff. There is a lot of anti-British hostility in mainland Europe right now. So to any Europeans watching this, pro-EU Europeans, I would say this. Firstly, 16 million of us voted for staying in, so stop with the generalisations. But secondly, the 17 million Britons who voted out were not all racists, and they were not all stupid. What I would politely say to my fellow Europeans is A, you need to respect the British decision. It was a democratic decision taken in a democratic referendum. Both sides were heard. And yes, there's issue about the Leave side telling lies and so on. I think, to be honest, there was a lot of hyperbole on both sides. There is a lot of questions over Boris Johnson. Actually, that was one of the questions Jeremy Corbyn pitched about Johnson's pickaninny comments. Boris Johnson is well known for making his politically incorrect statements. Um, this is one of those issues that people need to kind of move on a bit. It is true that Johnson has a long track record of making very politically incorrect statements, and I could definitely understand questions being raised. But in the end of the day, he is now British Foreign Secretary. And I don't agree with those who say that it's an embarrassment for Britain around the world, because this clownish image, actually, Boris Johnson is a very clever man. I do believe that. There was a comical scene when he met John Kerry, yes, who presumably in the American embassy. Kerry kind of hugged him and said, "This is called diplomacy, Boris." Um, Boris is a actually very liked figure in the British public. Even non-Tories like him. And I think there's a lot of focus on, oh, he's going to be embarrassing, so on. I think actually, perhaps we need a big character at this time. If Theresa May was to choose some unknown backbencher as foreign secretary, it wouldn't really work because surely we do need to punch above our weight or punch with our weight. We're still a powerful country on the world stage. So I just don't agree with those who are kind of prophesizing, oh, it's all doom and gloom, and Britain's a shadow of its former self, and we've suddenly pulled up the drawbridge and everything's falling apart. Let's get rid of some of this hyperbole and just calm down a little bit. It is not that bad, which is what I said to my Spanish friend. Um, he said it was a nightmare situation. It's not a nightmare situation. If Scotland breaks away, that to me would be catastrophic, and that is something I am concerned about. I'm going to make a video about it. But for now, at least, actually nothing has changed. The status of Europeans in Britain hasn't changed. The status of Britons in Europe hasn't changed. Um, the pound has rebounded. I voted Remain, but I'm not going to live in this kind of constant cynicism. I'm not going to do it because I don't think it is as bad as people are making it out to be. If everything falls apart, if Scotland leaves the UK, I think that would be devastating. But that will happen if it happens, when it happens. That debate will be, I will be making a video about it because it's an important issue. Interestingly, I saw an article today by, I'll just find the newspaper. This really caught my attention. Now, it has to be said, this is only the opinion of the writer, it's not official government policy. The Irish News: Republic should hold referendum on rejoining the United Kingdom. That's only from the writer. Unfortunately, I don't have his name, but it's not the first time that's been speculated on. When Brian Cohen was Taoiseach and Ireland was going through a severe financial crisis, there was serious talk of rejoining the United Kingdom. It would be incredible if Scotland left the UK and Ireland decided, let's just say for the sake of argument, there's a referendum in Northern Ireland, um, and let's say a United Ireland was created in the next 10 years. It is possible, okay? It is possible. Now, let's say there was a situation where a United Ireland chose to stay in the EU because it still is. The Republic of Ireland is still in the EU. Northern Ireland chose to vote to remain in. Let's say United Ireland saw itself, well, wait a second, we are kind of on the fringe here. The United Kingdom is out. We're kind of on, we're on our own here. And so far as the United Kingdom's big country is, we're close trading partner with the UK. It's an incredible thought given the history of relations between Britain and Ireland. But that would be incredible. And it may not be entirely inconceivable. Um, I'm not going to formulate my opinion too much on that. It's if the Irish decided to do it all of their own accord, I think it would be wonderful. If a United Ireland occurs, well, I haven't. The reason I haven't spoken so much about that as a Scottish issue is because it's well, not really any reason. I suppose the Scottish issue is a bit more prominent at this exact moment. But Mr. Brockenshire's is going to have his work cut out as new Northern Ireland Secretary. Anyway, I'm going to round this up. I've spoken longer than I intended. But that was Theresa May's first PMQs. So my feedback is, yes, she looks confident. Yes, she is confident, but she's going to have to be very careful not to be too smug and address questions in the nature in which they are delivered. I mean, it is true that Jeremy Corbyn is in a very weak position. The Labour Party is in a mess, but she shouldn't be too smug about that. Because if Jeremy Corbyn survives this, which is possible, he will remain leader, and it'll just end up that she will make the Tories look like the nasty party if she insists on these cheap jabs, especially on questions. I mean, by all means, she's doing her job. She answers the questions. If she answers the questions and she defends the government's record, that you would expect her to do that, but at least do it in a mature way. Don't throw in cheap shots about Mr. Corbyn's leadership because he has never done that when I suspect if, say for the sake of argument, Theresa May was facing major rebellion, would Jeremy Corbyn be throwing in cheap shots? I don't think he would. I really don't think that he would do that. I don't particularly like all of Jeremy Corbyn's politics. I'm much more to the centre. But I will say, in all honesty, this man has tried his level best to rise above personal jibes. No one can dispute that. What goes on outside Parliament's another matter, and there's definitely been ugly scenes outside Parliament, which is for another video. But final word, I don't think I mentioned it before. Owen Smith has now been narrowed down to the one remaining candidate. I don't know if Angela Eagle has left because of the abuse she received, which would be unfortunate because that, in my reckoning, would be the wrong reason to leave the leadership contest. I personally think that Owen Smith came across better. I believe that Angela Eagle focused too much on the fact she was a woman. It's totally irrelevant. Um, Time will tell. Owen Smith will have the Parliamentary Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn will probably have the members. We'll see what happens. I do think the fact it's long and drawn out, before I said September the 24th, actually September the 21st, but that is still like 2 months away. The Labour Party needs to really, really stabilise right now. This country needs a strong opposition. Ironically, probably the real opposition in this country right now is the SNP, and they're not even a British party. They're a separatist party that is only representing one home nation, or at least I think they are. I'll leave it there.